Welcome to the final Commodore 64 compilation comparison video of 2024, and in this video I'm going to be looking at a budget game compilation. This is the 4 game pack number 3 from Atlantis software, released in 1992 with 4 games on it, obviously at a cost of £3.99 originally, and I've already reviewed the first edition in this series a while back and it was pretty awful, so I'm hoping this one's going to be a little bit better. Let's take a look at the 4 games and find out. Before looking at the 4 games, of course, I will take a look at the packaging, and you might be wondering why I'm reviewing volume 3 or number 3 in this series and not number 2, and the reason for that is I don't have number 2 yet, but hopefully I'll get it at some point, and I think that would complete the set. So yeah, it's very similar, in fact it's identical, the design of the packaging to the first one in the series. You've got the Atlantis logo at the top and the sort of wavy sea kind of design in the background there, and then the covers of the 4 games, the images from the original releases of those 4 games, which are League Challenge, Survivors, Superkid in Space, which is the sequel to Superkid, which was on volume 1 of this series, and also Battlefield, and as you can see in the middle it says 4 game pack, in case you hadn't worked that out yet. The spine just says 4 game pack and the volume number on there, and on the back you've just got 4 screenshots, one of each game. So League Challenge is an overhead view football game based on that screenshot. That's not actually the truth though. Survivors is a maze game. Superkid in Space looks like a platformer, and Battlefield looks like some kind of combat rip-off, as in combat on the Atari 2600. So it says another 4 great games on one tape, joystick required, and screenshots may be from different computer versions, but I suspect they are all the Commodore 64 ones, possibly not that Survivors one, but the other ones I think probably are. So that's the outside of the packaging. Let's take a look inside. Here's a very quick look at the cassette, which is pretty boring. It's just a black cassette with the 4 game pack number 3 printed on it and the Atlantis software logo. So let's move on to the inside of the inlay, and pretty comprehensive instructions, I would say. So you've got the loading instructions at the top, then you've got the instructions for the 4 games, if I can turn the thing over, and yeah, they're pretty detailed. Battlefield, not particularly detailed, but I don't think it needs to be. Survivors has got a big section about how to play that. Superkid in Space, pretty detailed as well. Someone's in the past written the tape counter numbers on there, which I won't be making use of, but I do like that. I know a lot of people would probably moan about that and not want a tape inlay with writing on it, but I think that gives it a bit of provenance. It shows it was used back in the day, so I don't think these are particularly valuable anyway, so a bit of text written on them or writing written on them is not really a problem. But yeah, at the end here it says the programming artwork or copyright of Atlantis software, it's illegal to back up, it's all that blah 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 copyright information, isn't it? And also the address for Atlantis software, which was in Sevenoaks in Kent. So yeah, pretty good instructions, nothing outstanding, very similar to all the other budget compilations I've looked at, the Codemasters ones, the Zeppelin ones and all those kind of things. So yeah, they all follow a very similar format, which was probably set out by Codemasters in the first place, but it's pretty attractive, and if I saw that on the shelf in the shops back in the early 90s, I might have been tempted, because I think that selection of games looks quite good from the pictures at least. There's a football game and a couple of like puzzly maze type games. Well, one actually, I don't know why I said 2. I'm waffling a little bit now, aren't I? There's a platformer and a combat game, so a bit of variety. So it looks like a pretty good offering from this point. But let's take a look at the games now. No adverts for this one, unsurprisingly. A budget game compilation that cost £4. Didn't get any advertising in the magazines. So I'm going to jump straight to looking at the first of the 4 games, which is going to be League Challenge. League Challenge was originally released in 1989, and it's a football management simulation where you must select your team from one of the 64 listed. You can, if you wish, also change your team name. Whichever team you select, you'll begin the game at the bottom of Division 4. There are 15 league matches to be played in each division, along with knockout cup matches. Before each match you have some decisions to make about your team. You must decide the training level for your team for that fixture. The more intense the training, the more chance you stand of winning, but the more expensive the training becomes. You must also make a team selection to combat the strengths of your opponents. Select your defenders, midfielders and attackers on the basis of their skills and fitness, and remember that players need to be rested occasionally to improve their fitness, but skill cannot be increased. You can have up to 15 players in your squad at any time, and if a player is not good enough for your team, he can be sold on the transfer market. Once you've made your team selection, the match begins and you're shown the highlights, including any goals that are scored. At the end of each match, you'll be shown the results of other matches played that day, together with a league table. You'll also be given your financial position, showing your total income and expenditure for the week, together with a running total of your capital. You're allowed to go into debt up to a maximum of £250,000, but above this you're bankrupt and must start the game again at the bottom of Division 4. At the end of each season, the top 3 teams are promoted to the next division, and the bottom 3 teams are relegated. You'll keep the same team for the start of the following season, but the players' skill and fitness levels will be changed. If you've been a fan of football management games since the beginning like I have, then you may be thinking that this game looks incredibly familiar. It's basically a clone of the classic Football Manager from Addictive Games, but with an overhead view for match highlights instead of a side-on one. The similarities between this and the original Football Manager are substantial, with elements like the team selection and the transfer process being almost identical. Even the majority of the player names are the same, despite the game being released 7 years later. The only significant difference between this and Football Manager as I recall it is that you can influence the level of training that the team does, though I can't say this made a huge difference to the game. Your team seems very underpowered compared to most opponents, so it's very hard to outskill them. You also can't see your next fixture before you choose a training level, so you have no idea how fit the opposition is going to be. Each season consists of 15 matches, so you only play each team once in the league, which is odd, but it does mean that the game doesn't take as long. Another unusual thing I noticed was that from the 2 games I played, there seemed to be no randomisation of opponents. You play the same teams in the same order each time you start a new game. The match highlights take the more popular overhead view that football games adopted in this period, but they are pretty poor. Both teams have the same kit colours in every game, so you can't tell them apart, and as a result you probably won't even notice the switch between the first and second half. There are only a handful of sequences, probably even less than there were in Football Manager, so it soon becomes easy to work out if a team's going to score. Not that you have much control over that anyway, of course. There's no sound in the highlight sequences, nor anywhere else in the game actually, which does make the whole thing quite dull. It also takes an absolute age to print the league table on screen after each match day, which again makes it very tedious. I would say this is actually a reasonable substitute for Football Manager if you'd not got it by 1989 or 1992 when this collection came out, but it is very basic by the standards of other football management games released in that period. Next up we have The Survivors, which was originally released by Atlantis in 1987. Your mission is to rescue almost 1,000 survivors from a hibernation dome damaged in a recent nuclear war. To complete the task you must guide 3 droids through the 7 levels of the building and teleport the survivors to safety. Each of the droids has a different function. The first one can tunnel through tons of earth at high speed. The second is able to teleport the survivors to safety, and the third is a droid of immense strength, used for moving fallen boulders, although even he can only move one at a time. The damage to the dome is so severe that the slightest mistake can result in a fall of boulders. If one of your droids is hit by a boulder, serious power loss will occur. You must also beware of the Guardian droids left in the dome to maintain the life support systems. Their circuits were damaged by the nuclear fallout and they're now hostile, and contact with one of these will also result in power loss. The only way to dispose of these mutant droids is to trap or crush them with a boulder. Every move you make must be planned to ensure that your droids and the survivors do not become trapped, as you have to rescue every survivor on the level to proceed to the next. This game is new to me on the C64, but I did play the BBC Micro version when I was a kid. I suspect it originated on that system as it has a look that is reminiscent of Superior Software's Repton, and the red, yellow and cyan colour scheme was commonly used on the Beeb. The gameplay also brings Repton or perhaps Boulder Dash to mind, being an action puzzle game where you must negotiate a subterranean maze. The main difference is that you must switch between the 3 robots with different abilities to rescue the survivors, which adds an extra level of complexity and requires careful planning. The graphics are pretty simple for the most part and there's very little animation, but I do love the design of the earth digging robot, which has a distinctive 1950s sci-fi look. The sound effects are also very basic, with no music and the most notable noise being the ticking clock, which does add some tension. Controls are pretty responsive and the C64 version does give you the ability to use the fire button to switch between robots, which saves you reaching for the keyboard. The level layouts are fiendishly designed and it's very easy to make a mistake that gets you or a survivor stuck, which necessitates a restart. When this happens you start right from the beginning with a complete level reset, which is quite annoying. What the game is really missing is a map like Repton has, so you can work out your strategy for getting through the level more easily and have less risk of a rockfall that ruins your progress. It would also be better if it didn't reset the entire level if you do have to sacrifice a life, as the game essentially becomes a trial and error memory test. I really love the idea of this game, and it could have been an excellent budget title with a couple of tweaks to make it more accessible, but as it stands it is very difficult and I've never got close to even completing the first stage. It's that time again where I say thank you to all my channel members, whose names you can see here in my Supporters Hall of Fame. If you're enjoying this video and would like to join these fine folks and support my efforts, why not become a member yourself? For a monthly fee starting from just 99p, you can get access to the special membership perks shown on screen, and more besides. If you're interested, then please click on the join button below this video for more information. If you're not able to commit to a monthly contribution but would still like to support my channel, then you could also give a super thanks. This one-off donation gives you a highlighted comment on whichever video you choose to click the button on, and anyone doing this will also get a shout out from me on a subsequent video. The super thanks button can be found below every video I produce. You can also help raise the profile of this channel by liking this video and leaving a comment, which helps improve my ranking in the mysterious YouTube algorithm. Any support you can give, financial or otherwise, is greatly appreciated. The third game on the compilation is Superkid in Space, which was originally released in 1991 and is a sequel to Superkid, which featured on the first of these Atlantis 4 Game Pack compilations. In this game, the world has been surrounded by alien forces who have moved their planet ships towards Earth in search of minerals and other riches. The world leaders have been threatened with total destruction if they show any resistance. There's only one hope for mankind: Superkid. Professor Ian Stein, Superkid's uncle and source of his amazing powers, has developed special super energy pills for use in the deadly atmosphere of the alien planet ships. These, together with 4 high-power nuclear detonators and other vital mission equipment, have been dropped onto each of the planet ships. Superkid must begin each mission by landing on the planet ship. To do this, you must use left and right controls to direct your spaceship onto the landing pad. Pushing up will thrust the ship upwards to slow it down. 500 points are given for a good landing, but 6 super energy points are lost for a bad one. Once you've landed, you must negotiate the planet ship, find the 4 detonators, return to your ship, blow up the current planet ship and move on to the next one. You have at your disposal super energy, ammunition, grenades and ropes, and extra supplies of these can be found on each stage. You will of course have to contend with enemy forces and environmental hazards to complete each mission. The first thing that stood out for me in this game is the presentation is really good, with a nice title screen that has a solid SID tune, an overview of all the main game objects and a high score table. In-game presentation is also impressive, with an info-packed status panel and a between-level progress screen that shows the planets you have left to visit. The graphics are pretty good, with nicely drawn backgrounds that vary from one level to the next, and the objects and enemy sprites are okay too. Unfortunately, the player sprite is a bit naff, lacking both detail and colour variation. The sound effects are simplistic noises for jumping and collecting items, but I suppose they're good enough. There's no in-game music, but that's regularly the case for budget games in particular, so I'm not hugely surprised. Gameplay is a mixed bag. The premise is perfectly fine, and while the levels are quite short, they are well designed for a budget game. Movement is a little clunky though, especially jumping, as you can fall off the edge of platforms just as you're about to jump a gap. It's also quite easy to hit the landmines when you think you're about to jump over them cleanly. The ropes that you use to move between platforms are a neat idea, possibly influenced by Bionic Commando, and allow variation in how you play the game to some extent. It can be tricky to get on them and stay on them sometimes though. The Lunar Lander inspired minigame before each stage adds some variety and also the possibility for bonus points, but it's not very well implemented with the ship being juddery, and it's hard to get a clean landing, which then costs you health. The first level is easy enough to complete, but it gets much harder from level 2 onwards due to the green indestructible bouncing enemies that quickly drain your health. You need to hit the generators for those enemies with grenades quickly to allow you to make progress, but that can be difficult to achieve. You only have 1 life, so those enemies will cause you to see the game over screen until you get to grips with how to dispose of them, and I didn't see any health power-ups on the later levels to allow for fair progress. While it's not amazing by any means, overall this was quite a fun game that I enjoyed more than I expected, and it's definitely an improvement on the original Superkid. It just needed a little more polish and a less steep difficulty curve to help it stand out a bit more, but even so, I think it's a pretty solid budget game. The fourth and final game on the compilation is Battlefield, originally released in 1988. Furious battles ensue as you try to outwit your opponent in this two-player tank versus tank battle simulation. Cunning, fast reactions and accurate shooting are all needed if you want to blast your opponent out of the game. Choose from one of 4 different zones to compete in and try to eliminate your opponent's tank 4 times before they can do the same. This is going to be a pretty short review because there's not really a huge amount to say about this pretty simple game. It's another one with good presentation, with its free choice of 4 stages and a decent title screen with music. The game is unfortunately 2-player only, so it's no good unless you have someone to play against. Luckily I managed to convince my wife Anna to play against me and help me capture the footage for it. The 4 single screen stages are nicely drawn, aside from the black one which is hard to navigate. Each one has a different layout of walls to manoeuvre around, so there is some variety there, though having more arenas to choose from would have improved the game. The tanks look really good with their high-res overlays and they move smoothly and are responsive to the controls. The gameplay is very simple, just being the same as the original Atari 2600 packing game Combat, but it's fun for a while. There are a few quirks though, such as being able to lose a life after shooting your opponent by crashing into them as they're exploding. You can also end up with a draw if you crash into each other when both players are down to their last life, which renders the whole contest pointless. Battlefield is a reasonable multiplayer game, but it doesn't have much longevity. Adding a CPU opponent or elements such as power-ups or interactive environments would have improved it a lot, as would more stages to play in as I already mentioned. I think a more dedicated programmer could have made this into a much better game, even though it isn't a total write-off as is. That was 4 Game Pack No.3 then, and with a football management sim, a platformer, a brain-taxing action puzzle game and a multiplayer combat clone, this budget compilation certainly has good variety and the quality of the 4 games is reasonably good too. A couple of them offer a serious amount of longevity, and while none are outstanding, none are absolutely dreadful either, so it was a solid bundle for the modest asking price. Time now to give those 4 games an individual rating and then score the compilation as a whole of course. Kicking things off, pardon the pun, was League Challenge, and this is just a blatant clone of Football Manager, but to be fair, that game sold very well, so it is a decent one to copy. There are flaws in it though, and it was quite basic for a football management game by the late 80s, and that does make it the worst of the 4 games on offer. Even so, it's worth a score of 5 out of 10. The Survivors is a neat twist on the Boulder Dash style action puzzler, with the 3 robots giving you something more to think about. It is a big game, but it's also very tough, and with one mistake causing a total reset of the level, it could also be quite frustrating. For that reason I'm going to score it 6. Superkid in Space is impressive on the graphical and presentation side for the most part, with a couple of neat ideas gameplay wise too. It does get difficult very quickly though, and there are a few issues with the controls, but I still think at the budget price point this is a pretty decent game that I would probably have persevered with if I'd had it back then. I'm going to score it 7 out of 10. And finally, Battlefield is a fairly straightforward clone of Atari's Combat, with a graphical and audio spruce up. Control of the tanks is good and there is some variety in the 4 arenas, but it's let down by being a 2-player only game. Without someone to play against it is useless, but if you do have a human opponent then it's worth 6 out of 10 as a part of this collection. Let's move on to the overall compilation rating now then, and as always I'll start with the packaging. This is pretty standard budget compilation packaging, which is nicely presented on the outside and has pretty good instructions on the inside. I gave the first edition of this series of compilations 7 out of 10, so this gets the same. The average score for the 4 games comes out at an even 6 out of 10, and as for value for money, well 4 games for £4 should always offer good value, but that hasn't always been the case with these budget collections. Somewhat surprisingly, I think this one does offer that, with no absolute duffers, a good variety of genres and some potentially long-lasting gameplay. I think you could have easily got a quid's worth of value out of each of these games back in 1992, and even now a couple of them are worth checking out if you've never played them. Consequently, I'm going to give a value for money score of 8 out of 10, and that means that the compilation rating for 4 Game Pack No.3 comes out at 66%. I'm sure you won't be particularly surprised to hear that there were no magazine reviews for this compilation, so let's move straight on to the league tables, and of course I'll start with the budget compilation rankings. And as you can see, 4 Game Pack No.3 has actually clinched top spot in this league table with its score of 66%, usurping Codemasters Quattro Sports by just a single percent. We're largely splitting hairs here, but while Quattro Sports definitely has a couple of better games on it, I think this Atlantis collection is a marginally better package overall. And given it leads by just 1%, I do mean marginal. Let's now take a look at the combined compilation rankings, bringing full price ones into the equation. And as you can see, 4 Game Pack No.3 has claimed 9th place, level on points with Arcade Hall of Fame, but there's no arguing that that's a better compilation. While it was never going to trouble the top end of this league table, it is nice to see another budget collection make the grade here. The only thing that remains is for me to ask you, what do you think of this compilation and the 4 games contained within it? Do you agree with my assessment, or do you think I've been overtaken by festive cheer and rated it a little bit too highly? Sound off in the comments and let me know. That rounds off my second full year of C64 compilation reviews, and so far it seems that nothing can come close to Thalamus's hits collection, with even big hitters like Giants and the Magnificent Seven falling short. In the next edition of this series, I'm going to be looking at a bumper compilation of 10 games that helped feed the world 40 years ago. After that, I'm going to be asking my members and subscribers to help choose the compilations I'll look at over the next 12 months, so please keep an eye out for polls on my channel page. Thanks very much for watching this video, have a happy new year, and until the next one, see ya!